Donovan.
Hello. Hello.
Welcome back to Liverpool.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here.
What are you doing here? It's International Beatle Week.
Well, yeah. My relationship with the Beatles is very close, and it started very early with what we were writing about. And what we were writing about was having fun and dancing, yes, but it was a deeper level, and that deeper level was talking to the human condition, and we found in each other a comradeship and also a mission to try to find out if there was anything we could put in our songs that would uplift a whole generation and point them towards our main interest, I think, was meditation. You know, John, Paul, George and Ringo and I, we, of all the singer-songwriters, found that comradeship in doing that. So whenever I'm invited to a Beatle Week or a Beatle Fest, I'm here. Why? Just like Paul and Ringo and David Lynch, the transcendental meditation, any chance to actually highlight it again, I'm here. And so I'll continue with Linda, myself, Ringo and Paul and David Lynch to introduce transcendental meditation to schools. It's now in prisons. It's now for the soldiers returning, anywhere there's stress. And so whenever I'm asked, I come. But this one especially, because I said, can we do the White Album? Because of the meditation, because of India. And they said, John of the Cavern Group of productions here, said, yeah, of course. So we did something called Shram Rock. There'll be a little bit of it on my Facebook soon, I think. But what we did was I played with the Cavern Beatles band and a sitar, a little group called Jazz Deep, which is a wonderful group here. Sitar, tabla, tambura, and I did the songs that we all worked on in India, and that's why I'm here.
So how do you find the audience here in Liverpool?
Well, they couldn't get away. They were all inside of one place. So they were in the Royal Court, which is an extraordinary bit of history of Liverpool, and a wonderful venue, and it was packed, and it was wonderful. They were right into it, and the production was fantastic. There was a projection behind of an Indian temple, of course, well, it just worked out fantastic.
How did that connection start then? Can you remember the Maharishi, and because it's well documented about the Beatles went to this show in London, I think, but how did you become involved with that? Were you already there?
Well, the Beatles were already there too, but I might have just been 6 months, maybe 9 months before, in introducing in my songs in 1965 the possibility of the bohemian ideas entering pop culture. In history they call it the folk invasion of the charts, but really it was more than just folk music. It was all the subjects that Gypsy Dave and I and my darling Linda were already reading about at the age of 15 and 16 in what they called the beatnik underground of Britain. And in the beatnik underground, and my father's reading to me, there were books about meditation and how helpful it can be. And so I was interested in it, wondering when would I meet a yogi to teach me the mantra. And George was also looking, and the Beatles were looking. And when we met, we found in our homes in 1966, when we visited, we found we were reading the same books. So we were waiting to see where this guru was going to come from. And sure enough, he arrived. And so we went to India to study. And that's what happened. But how did we get to India? Well, Patty Boyd is here this weekend in the Beatle Week. The story goes like this. George actually is listening to sitar in the film Help. And he's fascinated. And he looks at the guy and says, what's that? I love that music. And so what George is remembering is his previous life. Now reincarnation has to be talked about. We just didn't find meditation and Maharishi one weekend in Wales, they found, and me one weekend in California when I met him. It must have been happening way before that. And in Ireland, in the ancient Gaelic, so-called Celtic tradition, we also believe in reincarnation, just like the Indians. So George, how did we get to India? Well, George wanted to play the sitar. So what did he do? He he went to meet Ravi Shankar. He went to India, and Ravi Shankar began to teach him some of the basics of sitar. But Patty was with him. So Patty was taken out by the Shankar woman, dressed in a sari, and they went to see Indian classical dance in '66, I guess it was. But also, she was taken to see a guru, a young teacher called Maharishi Maheshwari, who was come just out of the mountain in the great Shankaracharya tradition. He'd come down into the west. He wanted to go to the west, but he was teaching in Delhi. And the Shankar women thought Patty should see this. This is very important. So it was the women that brought Maharishi to us. And then George we went back to England, and Patty she said she was at home and looking at the news, and there was Maharishi. He's going to Wales. This is the teacher I told you about, George. We should all go down. And so they went down, and I saw it in the news, and I said to George, he's here, right? This is the guy. He said, looks like he's here, John. So let's go and see him in India, and that's what happened.
So a certain synchronicity to every event, really.
Well, we were meant to meet because if you look at the lyrics, Donovan and the Beatles, it's most lyrics that point towards going within through meditation. My one was in 1965, Sunny Good Street. The magician, he sparkles in satin and velvet, and you gaze at his splendor with an eye you've not used yet. I tell you, his name is love, love, love. Meanwhile, George is singing, say the word and you'll be free, and you know the word is love, it's sunshine, it's so fine, say the word. So we're headed for each other through the lyrics. And then Sunshine Superman, of course, uses sitar, the album, and George has begun to use sitar. So we were headed for each other, and we saw in each other that there was something we could do for our millions of fans, not only for the fans themselves, but also for the world. And that's happened. We brought back to the West a simple form of introspection called transcendental meditation. That's the story.
If we go back to the very start, why did you pick up a guitar in the first place? How did that happen?
I was a drummer at 14, but not in a band. I just loved jazz and I wanted to be a drummer, so I forced my parents to get it on the hire purchase. You know, £3.10 a month. But it was so loud in the wee house after Glasgow, and moved to Hatfield in the south of England in 1955, which is a very important year for music, as we all know. But I was making these noises, and I loved it. But then I got the snare and started playing with Mick Sharman, my school pal. He was on guitar. Dippy, who ended up in the song Epistle to Dippy, he was playing sax, snare drum, and acoustic guitar. Not much of a band. But it was everything to 15-year-old boys. And one day I said to Mick, let me try the guitar. I said, I like it. And he said, I've got a girlfriend who's got a guitar. She doesn't play it. I said, I'll borrow it. And she never got it back. And I made my first album on it. It was called Zenith. And when I saw a picture of McCartney and the Quarrymen, or even before the Quarrymen, when he was 14 or something, he had one. I didn't know this for 46 years when I started looking for one, because actually I gave it away. I wanted another one, and I saw McCartney had one once, and so that's the story of me. As soon as I picked up the guitar, all the rhythmic patterns that I'd learned on the drums, I translated to the guitar, and now I'm known in sessions, and Jimmy Page has said it, and Beck and many others, Donovan's got a steady, unfailing tempo to his guitar playing. That's why we love playing with him, apart from the quirky songs and the sense of humour. It's fun to do sessions with Donovan. And this guitar playing that I do is very much based on rhythm. In fact, I brought in most of the Caribbean rhythms that would become part of the 70s. I brought them in the 60s. The early ska, the blue beat, and then the reggae. I already had done the calypso and stuff like that. So that's how I picked up the guitar. And I loved it because I was about to hitchhike away, leave society behind, find the nearest bohemian community of painters and poets and sculptors and literature and philosophy and meditation and yoga and all the things that were in the books that were fascinating us. They were there in the bohemian communities, of course London. And I had to go to London. But I had St. Albans, another bohemian community where I went to. So the guitar was easier because you could hitchhike with it. That's why I picked up the guitar.
Ready, Steady, Go.
No, TV. No, Ready Steady Go was a TV show every Friday night. And I wasn't really dreaming to be on TV. But I wanted to go to Tin Pan Alley. Now, Tin Pan Alley was a street in London. If you want to make shoes, you have to go where the cobblers are. If you want to make music and you want to play roots music, you have to go to the folk clubs, the blues clubs and the jazz clubs, and the rare record store. If you want to have your songs published, you have to go to Tin Pan Alley. And I'd heard about it. And another writer, songwriter called Jeff Stevens, who wrote The Crying Game, Winchester Cathedral, and a ton of other hits, he saw me in a club in South End of the Sea, and he took me up to Tin Pan Alley. I went in the basement. Tin Pan Alley was full of publishing houses and little basement studios. There was one under each publisher. And I was in Peer Music, it was called Southern then, doing some demos. Brian Jones was in Essex Music, doing some demos with his band. He came in and saw me, and he saw I played harmonica pretty good. I didn't really know him, but I knew his music. Genius. Played 9 instruments. Could play harmonica like any blues guy. Invented the Rolling Stones, no matter what Mick and Keith say. He was the one. Bill Wyman says the same. So Brian came in and heard what I was doing. And he kind of encouraged me. And I was only 18. Upstairs was a publishing house called Peer Music. Bob Kingston. Jeff Stevens called up Elkin Allen of Ready Steady Go and said, the TV show, you should have Donovan on there. And I didn't know for 35 years that Brian was on the show, and he spoke to Elkin Allen. And he said, if you don't have this kid on the show, you're going to miss something. The roots are arriving in popular culture. This kid's got them. And I didn't know that for 35 years. Elkin Allen had me on the show 3 weeks in a row. Shall I stop? I can pick it up.
It's okay.
Yeah, you get to go.
It's good now?
Yeah.
So Brian said to Elkin Allen, you've got to have this kid on the show. If you don't, you're going to miss something extraordinary. He's going to bring the roots and poetry as well into popular culture. Brian did this, and I didn't know he did it for many, many years. But when I went on the show, everybody was miming. They already had a record, and they played the record just like a DJ, and they pretended to play and sang. I didn't have a record. So Elkin Allen and Michael Hodges, was it Michael, the director, said the kid's got to play live. So I was the first live performer on a pop show in a Friday night in February of 1965, 3 weeks in a row, and I'd sit with Kathy McGowan, the VJ, and she'd say, so Donovan, where did you sleep last night? Oh, in a friend's couch in Putney, because I was still hitching. But nobody believed that this kid was actually on the road, like a gypsy.
Yeah.
Gypsy Dave and I didn't have a house. We just kept moving between Cornwall and London and Manchester, hitchhiking trucks. Although the second week, the newspapers said Donovan was late for his second Ready Steady Go because cars weren't picking up hitchhikers on the A1. Third week on Ready Steady Go, Donovan was late for his third Ready Steady Go appearance because his mum couldn't wake him up and tell him the limousine's here. And so then they let me go. In the fourth week they let me go. And the mailbag was huge. They'd never seen so many letters coming in. And so they had to have me back for 2 more weeks, and then I released Catch the Wind. That's my story of Ready Steady Go.
That's a fantastic story. Going back a little while, did the impact of Merseybeat affect you in any way of what was happening here? Sort of early Beatles,
Yeah,
but also all the other bands in town. Were you aware of this?
Of course, they were
Obviously
called beat
Beatles,
bands.
but
They were called beat bands. And although people all thought that I was just folk and listening to Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger, and then a little bit of Dylan, but lots of Joan Baez, and lots of Buffy St. Marie, and lots of Martin Carthy, and lots of Ewan McCall, and lots of British folk music, I was listening to everything. And lots of jazz. But I was also listening to pop music. Of course I was listening to pop music. I was listening to, when I was 14, the Everly Brothers, Buddy Holly, and Cliff Richard. And then when the Mersey sound came, that was fascinating. Not only the Beatles, but the Mersey Beats were my favourite. Oh yeah, and I actually recorded a demo of, I don't know what the song's called. When the night is cold and my
I Think of You.
I Think of You.
I Think of You is the record.
And remember, I was 14. I was in love with the girl swimming champion in the school. It was, thank God it was a secondary school, boys and girls. And I loved swimming because I had the polio when I was a kid in Glasgow, so it was good for me. And I loved this, the relay, the four swimmers in sync, 2 boys, 2 girls. Why? The girls were in swimsuits. Football wasn't so interesting. Swimming was much more interesting. And I can't remember her name, but I wrote my first love song for that girl, I think. Anyway, so I was swimming, I was in school listening to pop music. I heard it all, North to Alaska, Dwayne Eddy, as I said, the British hits. Cliff Richard was a big influence on me. He was huge. And his songwriting for his songs were really clever and very smart. And so when I listened to the Mersey Beats as well, and listened to the sound up here, I just thought, these guys know something. I really like it. Also, I was at 16 and a half, nearly 17, I'd run away from home and I was washing dishes in St. Ives, a cardboard wall away from the jukebox, pumping out the first early Beatles hits. I didn't know that I'd meet them so soon, but it was something about the recordings, the Buddy Holly recordings, the Everly Brothers, the sound of the recording. It wasn't just I wanted to write songs, but I wanted to know how that's done. I wanted to be a voice on a disc. I wanted to know what the studio was like. All that. And one trip home on my hitchhiking days, my mum was at the factory and the key was under the mat. My father was in the factory. My brother, who was 5 years younger, he was in school. And I let myself in. And I went up to the old bedroom where I just left. I told my mum I was coming back. But I didn't know, something wasn't working on the road. I'd learned a lot of stuff, but I didn't really know where to go next. And I turned the radio on. It was one of those plastic Bakelite jobs, like the front grille of an American automobile from 1952 or something. And there was a DJ and I was half asleep. And the DJ put a recording on and it was a harmonica, drums, 2 acoustic guitars, and what I identified as Aeolian harmonies, because I by now had done a lot of listening when I was a kid to Irish and Scottish music, and I knew what Aeolian harmonies were. They're the Gaelic way of singing, a certain way of singing. And I had an epiphany. I just sort of went, I didn't know who they were. I said, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to blend pop music, popular sounds, and everything I've heard from the Evs and Buddy Holly, and a bit of the Beatles, with my own deep, meaningful, poetic lyrics called folk music, but not really. And I'm going to blend that Gaelic sound. I'm going to do it. I want to do what those boys are doing. The DJ came and said, and that was the Beatles with Love Me Do. 7 or 8 months later, I was in the same room talking to these guys. And so that's how it worked for me. Pop music was part of me. In Dylan's early music, I think it's all folk music and blues. No, there's rock and roll there. When he was a kid, he's listened to Ricky Nelson and the Everly Brothers and Elvis. I was a bit young for Elvis, but I picked up on Elvis later. especially the early stuff.
Oh. There was a leap with Sunshine Superman album. I mean,
man.
that
Yeah.
took the music and started something, didn't it? Really? I mean, that was the,
Yeah, man.
should we say psychedelic or era, or
Yeah.
how do you sum that up best?
People think the jump from the so-called 2 albums of Donovan, so-called folk, sometimes blues, to the Sunshine Superman album was such a giant leap, because Sunshine Superman has everything on it that will be part of popular music: sitars, Latin congas, harpsichord, classical music, troubadour music, Celtic and Gallic philosophy, the stories of Guinevere and King Arthur, all these things that were going to pour in. I had on this one album, half of it made in late '65, the other half in early '66. But it wasn't such a leap for me, because I'd had Sonny Goodstreet on the second album in '65, which was a jazz suite. The jazz I love, the classical, the folk poetry, the words about meditation, the words about Gallic, Celtic mythology, and smoking hashish, and alternative society, and the 3 magic words: love, 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 which would become a mantra on the Beatles recordings in about a year or 2 later. So this is all inside me, and I'd already absorbed classical, baroque, jazz, Eskimo, Indian, South American jazz, the bossa nova, the American Indian chants, 3 levels of jazz, 3 different periods of jazz from the 20s, the 30s and the 40s. I pretty much had it all, and I like the Beatles, and that's another comparison, the 2 of us, this band called the Beatles and Donovan. We were sponges. We absorbed so much, and we got it straight away. We listened to it. And there's a story that I tell, that when Dylan came down from Hibbing, Minnesota, he came to the Twin Cities first, Minneapolis. And the story he tells in his book is that an older Bohemian saw he was serious, took him into a room in a Bohemian house in in Minneapolis, and said, "You see that record collection of vinyl? It's like, it must have been about 300 of them, I would imagine. You spend a couple of days here, Bob, and you listen to everything. And if you really want to be serious about this, it's all there." And when I read that, I remembered the same thing happened to me. I went to St. Albans. The police were sent to find me. If you were under 18 when you were left home in Britain in the early 60s, it was against the law. And the police came and got you. Could you believe this? And they couldn't find me because I was 2 days in an older Bohemian pad near St. Albans, where the parties were, where the jazz was, where the blues was, where the philosophy was, where the literature and all the books were. And the guy said to me when he saw I was playing, he says, "If you're serious, come into this room." And he took me into a room, and there was a line of vinyl. Must have been about 300 of them. And he said, "If you're serious, spend 2 days here and listen to them all." There was William Butler Yeats reading poetry, W.H. Auden reading poetry. And there was so much. All the comics were there, the heavy comedians that had recorded, and all of the jazz and the blues and the folk and the Eskimo music and the Indian music and Ravi Shankar. And so I just sat there for 2 days, and it all went in. So it's there. So as soon as I had the chance, when I met Mickey Mouse, I said, now I want to, as soon as I met Mickey Mouse, I said, now I've got a producer of note. I want harpsichord. And Mickey said, harpsichord? You need an arranger. So he introduced me to John Cameron, who was already well voiced in all forms of classical, jazz, blues, ethnic music, just like me. But he could write it down. So the 3 of us started the Sunshine Superman album. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, when I was inducted in 2012, a writer said Donovan single-handedly initiated psychedelic revolution. And I said, did I? And we went back and checked the dates. Nobody was anywhere near that album for at least a year before they could even talk about what I was talking about. And so I was very pleased to have opened that door, and I don't think anybody else could have. And I got it. I got the resistance. I was immediately on my second album targeted by the drug squad secretly. That the second album, Sunshine Superman, they went for me right away like pit bulls. They got me, they put me in court, busted me in jail, made an example of me. A great resistance. It wasn't funny. And by the way, we didn't have any that night. We just smoked the last joint. But they brought their own, just to be sure. And when my manager downstairs, Ashley Kozak, by then a bass player friend and my manager, he looked at me across the corridor at 4 a.m. in the morning after they'd busted me and the manager downstairs. Sergeant Pilcher was his name. Lennon would sing a song about Pilcher as well. We sat there in the hall, the corridor, and my manager said, "Don, they found 2 ounces of best Lebanese hash in my place." And I knew he didn't have any. And then he looked at me and said, "Oh, and by the way, they found 2 ounces in your place also." And we went, okay. Fingerprints at 5 a.m. And Sergeant Pilcher says, "You know, it's only my job. Can I have your autograph for my daughter?" The next day, we had to get a taxi away and get a cheap little rock and roll hotel because the press of Europe and then soon the world were around the apartment. The first bust of the 60s. So we got in a taxi and went to a restaurant. Gypsies tried to pay the taxi, and it's all over the newspapers. I mean, Donovan jumps naked on the back of the back of a policeman and a newspaper man. The orgy at Donovan's pad in London. Nothing of the kind took place. But Gypsy tried to pay the taxi. The taxi says, "No charge." We went to the restaurant for lunch. My favourite restaurant, Italian. Had a wonderful meal. Gypsy tried to pay. The guy said, "No charge to you." Everywhere we went in London, everybody knew what had happened. 12 noon, George Harrison calls. "Hello, Don, is everything all right? You can have £10,000 by 4 o'clock. I said, "We've got the money. We'll get a lawyer. We'll get a barrister. Brian Epstein's going to get me a QC. What are you going to do now, Don?" I said, "Well, Jip and I are going to go up to Scotland to a little island called the Isle of Islay until it all dies down." And George said, "It'll never die down, Don. We'll be next." Click. And they were. So that resistance I was talking to somebody about today, it's important it's there, but it was quite dangerous and very disturbing. And they took my passport away and all that. And then they did the Beatles and the Stones and everybody. And then at the end of the 60s, Sergeant Pilcher, head of the drug squad, was busted himself for planting drugs on people that didn't have any. So there you go. That's a wee story. Few stories. We've forgiven them, of course. It's all water under the bridge now.
That's terrific. I'm very conscious of time whizzing by and you having to be somewhere.
Let's find out, shall we?
Can we finish with...
Yeah, we've got to finish with something you want to talk
was
about.
gonna
It's
say.
2:30.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, in that
You
case...
say half.
Yeah,
That's good.
we got to go and see.
We
Happy
do, we'll be
Boy
fine. Yeah,
3.
what I would
We'll do some
like
quick
to ask
answers.
is today, now what's coming up next?
Okay.
Where Donovan,
Where am I?
the
Where's
future.
Donovan now?
Yeah.
Well, after some retreat 2 years ago, more, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Last year, the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Last year, the Mojo Maverick Award given to me by Jimmy Page. BMI, PRS Awards. All that was happening leading up to this year, which is my 50th anniversary. So Linda, my darling, my muse, said, "Okay, it's time to get out there. You want to do some live now." And so I've taken on a tour in October and November, 33 cities in Europe, in the UK, from Glasgow to St Ives. Donovan.ie is the website, Donovan.ie. If you want to check this tour, because I'm coming to play in the Liverpool Philharmonic in the middle of October, can't quite remember the date right now, but it's there. Perhaps it's after the middle of October. So I'm going solo, cross-legged on a carpet with sheepskins and my acoustic guitars to celebrate my 50th by thanking all my UK fans first, because this is where I began. And I do thank you. Like Neil Young says, if it wasn't for you guys out there and the new ones, my music wouldn't have been supported. It wasn't the record companies. It was maybe the publishing company as well, Peer Music. But really the fans I'm going out to new fans as well. So that's what I'm going to do. Is there a new record? Yes, there's a retrospective actually released this summer. You can actually get it all over the place now on Amazon. Donovan Retrospective is the hits. But it's also my selection on the second CD of what I think happened in the 60s with the album tracks, if you know what I mean. The cult songs, the jazz, the blues, the troubadour, and the early folk music. So my new record, Retrospective, has one new song called One English Summer. I can't play it to you, but I'll give you the first line. Ooh. One English summer, crumpet everywhere. One English summer, jumbo in the air. It's reggae. It's more than reggae. It's more like a Caribbean song. So there's one new song, but I'm in the process now of completing a whole bunch of new recordings. Doubt if it will be out this year, but next year. And it just so happens, next year is my 70th birthday. That's right, isn't it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't feel 7. I don't feel 70. I feel 17. I really feel 17. I always have. But I'll be coming out again next year with a new record. And you check it, Donovan.ie, my website, and Facebook, which is on the website too. I'm very happy to be here at the first actual making of a Liverpool TV show devoted, I think, to music and the arts.
Absolutely. And Donovan, just one question. One of our motivations for this as well is to inspire young people to create and to pick up instruments and paint or whatever, especially locally in local community. Have you anything, a message for those of anything that you want to say to maybe, to bring that about?
If you can get in and afford it, art school is good. Even if you want to make music, art school is good. Why? The boys and the girls are much more interesting in art school than regular college. But you also will get a grounding in visual arts. And so a lot of the 60s artists paint and write. You know that. John Lennon, George Harrison, he was an artist. Dylan's an artist, Joni Mitchell's an artist, I'm an artist. So a grounding for at least a year, even if you just dump it after a year, if you can get in somehow to art school, and art school has got a way of preparing you for the visual arts as well, because visual arts is important for young artists today, as it was for us, but even more so now, in presenting your image on the internet, which you must embrace. But what you've got to do is make your own music if you can, but don't forget analog. And if you really want to learn how to write songs, listen to Donovan on the first albums in 1965. That's a songwriting lesson there. And of course, Beatles songs in 65 and 66. You'll learn a lot of stuff. And acoustic guitar is king. I like it.
That's excellent. One very final question, and it's a quickie. Superman or Green Lantern?
Next time before we go to the Spanish place.
There's my Green Lantern ring.
Excellent.
It's an
brightest day and blackest night.
It's emerald, but it's not a polished emerald. It's a cabezon. It's a gypsy. I brought it from a gypsy. And so the Green Lantern had a green ring, I guess. But comic book heroes are really the mythology of today, it would seem. And there isn't a 6 months go by where another movie comes out based on myths and legends. And I told you that I was the first to open that door, bring back Gallic and Celtic myth and legend, and it has come back. Okay, they alter it and they make it really violent, but still, myths and legends, Superman and Green Lantern, and all those characters from my comic book days, let's pop out.